Part 2. Making a minor change to an existing layout. We begin by looking at the same layout that we were looking at in the introduction, and I have two goals for this video. One, I want to show you some things internally about how I prepared this particular layout. That will help us in the learning process of how to use the Course Designer. And then my second goal is I'm going to move a shooting stand over here behind this particular trap house, and it's going to be facing the first trap house over here, and so I'm going to create an incoming target. If you remember, roughly the distance from where the shooter is facing to this row of traps over here is about 27 yards. So it's my intention to put another shooting stand about 8 yards behind this trap, and that will mean that the distance to the center of right in front of this particular shooter will be about 35 yards, where the target will roughly be at its apex. Now let's go ahead and move to the upper left-hand corner, click on the File button, and then we're going to come to Layouts, click on it. And then in the Layouts dialog box that opens, I'm looking for the name of my layout, which is Sporting Crossers Bobs. So I'm going to click to highlight that. Then I'm going to come down and click on Edit. That's then going to take me to a representation of this particular layout. Notice in the upper corner here that we have what the field looks like, but this represents how we created that in the first place. I'm going to take the slider on the right-hand side and pull that down so we can see more of the field. The brown line around the outside is the fence. The green area up here on the right is one of the hills. The green area over on the left is another hill. Let's go up to the top while we're here, and we'll look at, here's an additional hill, and here we have 5 trees. Let me move this on down where we can see the shooting stand, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the shooting stand. Now the shooting stand is always symbolized by a blue square. So when I click on that, the only thing that I see right now is the word height. And if I were to pull the slider down a little bit more so you can see all of it, there's a lever on here. And if I wanted to make this shooting stand anything other than ground level, I can simply start pulling up on it, and now I have a shooting stand that is 13 feet high. So I can go way on up there, looks like to about 65 feet. I really don't want any height on this shooting stand, so I'm going to bring it back down to ground level. But that's one of the features. The other thing I want you to look at is there is a little gray circle here attached by a line that is only visible when I have clicked on this, and this gives me an indication as to where the opening in the stand is. The gray bubble always represents the back of the shooting stand, and therefore the front of this square would be where the shooter would be shooting out in that direction. All right, that's enough about the stand, and we will be adding one in just a little bit. In fact, let's go ahead and add that right now. How do we add a shooting stand? We're going to come up here and click on this where we have a little shooter standing there. We're going to click on that. Then I'm going to bring my arrow, and notice as I'm bringing my arrow, something is coming along with it. And I said that I wanted to put this about 8 yards behind this point. Each one of these lines is 1 meter. So I want to go about 7, perhaps, I'll just go 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. Now, I get it in the exact spot that I want it, and I do a left click. And when I did a left click, now I have this blue object there, which represents a shooting stand. Now I want to orient that because I want it to be facing this trap over here so that I can shoot an incomer. How do I do that? I click on the blue square, and just like before, this opened up, and what I'm going to do this time, I'm not going to do anything about the height. I'm going to leave it at ground level, but I'm going to put my pointer on the gray circle, and I'm going to click and hold, and then I'm going to pivot this so that I get it to that spot and let go. Now, what I really have at this point is, remember, the gray area is where you would enter the stand and you would want to be looking and shooting out this direction. All right, so now you've seen me put a stand on the field, the extra one that we wanted. Now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to look at some other things. All right, this red is the trap that we're going to shoot targets out of. And let's see what happens when I click on it. And when I left click on it, I see the same thing, the height. I could go ahead and make this trap up in the air. I don't want it up in the air, so I'm going to bring it back down to ground level. So that's what we see with the trap. This little small circle over here represents where the clay is going to land on the ground based upon how I have it set. So the target will fly from the trap house down this line and land in this particular spot. Now you might ask, what is this bubble all about? Well, because I have another trap over here, when I'm selecting the right to left crosser at 15 yards, the clay comes out of the house and flies down and lands here, which is approximately 50 yards in its direction. Now, I'm going to come close to this trap house and put my arrow right on that line and do a left click. And when I do a left click, an additional window opens up. Now you can see down here that what it is the clay is going to come out of the house. That's the representation. It's going to fly in a trajectory and it's going to land over here. Now let's see what it's set for at this point in time. It says the clay is going to travel 49.03 yards in the air. The highest point along its travel is 9.33 feet. The angle coming out of the trap house over here is 13 degrees, and the velocity is 20. Now the only confusing thing is the velocity 20 is given in meters per second. Now we in America don't think in meters per second, we think in miles per hour. So I'm going to give you a conversion factor for that. If you take this number, which is in meters per second, and multiply it by 2.23694, that will give you a number in miles per hour so that you can relate to it. Now the velocity of 20 is approximately 44 to 45 miles per hour. And I purposely have set that target because I feel that, for instance, if you're out and shooting ATA trap, the target comes out of the house at about 43 miles an hour. And yes, it's possible that you can crank up the spring and make it come out faster, and you can slow it down. But somewhere around 45 miles an hour is an average speed of a clay target. And I chose on my crossers to have that particular average speed. And now for your convenience, I've converted meters per second into miles per hour from 17 meters per second to 30 meters per second, which covers a range of 38 miles an hour to 67 miles an hour. The other thing while we're here, and then I'll return it to what it was, I want you to realize that these two controls, once you have selected that line, you can set these dimensions up here based upon what you want. So if I go ahead and say that if I shift this farther and farther to the right, and the angle is greater and greater coming out of the trap house, you can see how it affects the trajectory of the clay. And notice here, when I am now at 27 degrees is the angle, the target only flies 42.39 yards, or it doesn't fly as far when I have the angle set higher. So that is what the angle control does for you. And then notice that you also have a velocity control. And as I pull this to the right, the velocity goes faster and faster, and every time this increases by 1, the target's flying about 2.5 miles per hour faster. Okay? So now that I'm out here at 24 meters per second, the target will now fly 55 yards at a height of 41 feet with an angle coming out of the house at 27 degrees. So you have complete control on every target After you put your trap house, set the direction that the clay is going to fly, then you can set your angle and your velocity for whatever you want. Now I'm going to return these back to what we had so we can continue with the discussion. And so we had an angle of 13 degrees. We're back to there, and we had a velocity of 20. Then I click anywhere and that window goes away. Now we're back to normal. So what we know is that this target, which is going to be our incomer, is coming out of the house at 45 miles an hour. It's going to fly approximately 50 yards in the air. And in fact, if I click where it touches the ground, notice that two things come into play. In the middle, it says that the clay is going to fly 48.94 yards at an angle of 89.9 degrees. And I can click and drag, and I'm just moving my cursor ever so slightly. I'm going to try and change that to 90.0. And I'm struggling to do that. I'm going to leave it, that's close enough. Okay, now we're going to move on, and we're going to create a new target. And we're going to create a new target in the following fashion. Notice over here on the left-hand side in the sidebar, I can click on New, and it helps me with instructions. It says Target Creation, Step 1, Target Picker, Stand or Station. Click on the stand or station from which the target will be taken. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to click on this stand. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and it says, now click on the first trap to be shot. So I want to shoot the target that's going to come out of this house, so I click on it. And then if I go back to the sidebar, it says the second trap is optional. To make the target a double, click on a second trap to be shot. So I could come over here and click on this trap, and then what would happen would be I would have two targets coming at me. This one would be coming at a slight angle. This one would be coming straight in on me. Now, I'm not going to make this one that complicated, so I'm going to bypass the option of having a second trap. So I'm simply going to click on Next. When I click on Next, now another window on the sidebar opens, and it says here, Target Creation Step 2, Target Details, the Viewing Angle. Now, if you look up here at the top, what we're looking at now is, it's just like if the field were expanded and we were looking that way. And our problem at this moment is maybe easiest seen by coming back over here, and notice that this arrow is pointing in this direction. So this is the shooter inside the stand looking in this direction. We purposely put the stand here so that the opening is on the left-hand side. And now let's go back to the view window and notice what the problem is. The shooter is looking in the wrong direction. So we're going to solve that by click and drag this, and we're going to do this. See, I'm turning the shooter's head right now, and the shooter is now looking more and more to his left. Notice back down here on the stand that the arrow is now pointing slightly to the left. I'm going to go back up here and continue to pull until I get the shooter facing the opening in the stand and facing the right direction. So right now I'm about as close as I can get it. I'm looking straight at that. If we come back over to the right-hand side, notice that the shooter is now looking right down the target at this trap house. All right, that was the next step. Now let's give this target a name, because this is the name it will appear in the target window. I'm going to call it Incomer. And the type is grayed out. I can't do anything there. And the shot order is either full use, which we currently have, or one shot. By full use, we simply mean the normal thing that dry fire always does, which is you can shoot at the target twice. I'm going to leave it in that fashion. Now it says you can shoot twice at the target. All right. Now, the next thing that I would do if I were you would be to come down and click on Preview, and if you have your dry fire unit hooked up, it will actually show you right in front of you exactly what that target presentation is going to be on the wall. And if you like that presentation, you're going to click on Save. And if you don't like that presentation, you're going to come back up here and click on Change Traps or Stands and do something different until you like it. I like what I see, so I'm going to click on Save. Now then, notice that in my target list on the left, Incomer is now the bottom target. In this list of targets that will show up in the target window, I can move the position of the Incomer target by clicking on Move Up, because it's at the bottom of the list, and each time I click on it, it moves one position up in the target list. And just so that you can get a better idea of how it fits in the scheme, I'm going to move it all the way to the top. Now we are basically done producing this target, and all we have to do is to come up here to the top, and we have our choices. If this is a permanent modification to this layout, we can click on Save. In my case, I'm just going to call it a modification. That means that I have the original way plus the new way. So I'm going to say Save As. And down here in the Save As window, I'm just going to put the word Mod 1 after it and click on OK. Now we've saved it, and I can come back up here and click on Finish. And now notice what we have. We have the shooter over here, about 8 yards behind this trap, facing this direction, looking straight down at this trap in this position. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what this target looks like from the shooter's position. And I'm going to do that by coming up here to View, and I'm going to come down and say From the Stand. Okay, so now this is from the shooting stand, and now I'm going to back this up a little so that you can see even a little bit different angle. So here is the stand that we put in. Let me move it forward so that you can see from the shooter's eyes. There's the shooter's eyes, and what you can see is the clay comes from this trap, which is some 54 plus 8, about 62 yards away, heads towards the shooter, and eventually will land on the ground in front of this trap before it gets to the shooter. And our hope is that the shooter then will be able to shoot this target when it's somewhere out there between 40 and 30 yards from the shooter. That is what I wanted to show you. You learned some control mechanisms within the Course Designer. You saw us make a change, and in other videos we'll go on into more detail. I hope that helps.